Hi, everyone. So I'm Jessie Crain. I'm the Antarctic Research Support Manager in the Office of Polar Programs at NSF. And I get to, in my job, provide the support for a lot of the amazing research, the kinds of things that we've been hearing about today. And so these days, this is supporting biologists who are studying penguins and its ecosystem in the Ross Sea, like this one, or the astrophysicists who are using this telescope at South Pole to answer questions like, how old is the universe and what is the universe made out of? Or this glaciologists who work at field camps like this one. This is at Pine Island Glacier in 2013, looking at ice sheet dynamics and using ice cores to look at climate history. And I am also responsible for supporting these two little people. These are Kate and Jack, my two children. They are now, this is an old picture, they're now 4 and 8 years old. So back when I first got to Antarctica in 1999, these are some photos from my first year. It was not an all-women research team, but we actually had a pretty nice balance of men and women on the team. I was not thinking about how I might eventually be balancing trying to work in Antarctica with being a mother. And so today I just want to talk a little bit about how I wound up in Antarctica at all, and how I and other women who are in the program now are managing or not managing. Working in Antarctica is sort of just another typical 21st century workplace. So I'm not going to be able to touch on all of the issues that mothers go through. And I recognize that a lot of the issues that we face in Antarctica they're kind of workplace issues for any working mother. Ours are just maybe a little bit more extreme than some. So my journey to Antarctica started in Hawaii, a little counterintuitive. When I was in college, I saw a flyer, there are bulletin boards around all the buildings like this for do this summer program or take this field course. And there was a summer program for a volcano monitoring course that was offered jointly by the University of Hawaii and the Hawaii Volcanoes Observatory, the USGS observatory out there. So I went off to Hawaii, didn't know anything about volcanoes, but they spent 3 weeks teaching us the different ways you can monitor active volcanoes. And it was completely amazing. And after this 3 weeks and a trip to the city of Hilo Civil Defense Center, where they talked to us about how important it is for people to be doing the research and learning about volcanoes and helping to prevent loss of life and loss of property and how you can inform governments. I was completely hooked on it. So I wanted to study active volcanoes for a career, and I applied to graduate programs. One of them was at the New Mexico Institute of Mining and Technology. And when I was accepted in school there, they offered me the chance to go to Antarctica to work on Mount Erebus, which is what makes up kind of the bulk of Ross Island, which is where McMurdo Station is located. It's the southernmost active volcano in the world. So as much as I did 3 years of field research and finished my master's degree, and I love volcanoes and I still love them, but I was completely entranced by Antarctica. It was, the place captivated me, the people captivated me. It was like a group of people who I knew that I could go to work every day and enjoy what I was doing and enjoy the people who I was working with. And right when I was finishing graduate school, the stars kind of aligned, and what felt to me like the perfect job opened up at Raytheon Polar Services, which was the logistics contractor at the time. There was a new group of science planners, and they were looking for people who had field research. And I was like, well, I have field research. I could go do that job and help other people get their science done. So I went off, moved to Colorado, took a job with Raytheon, And then shortly after that, I met my now husband. This is us when we got married. And we met at the Scott Base bar here, of all places. You know, boy meets girl at the bar, very typical. And for a number of years, we were both deploying, and we were traveling and going on trips, and it was completely uncomplicated. We would just like turn off the lights and close the door behind us and lock it up and go to Antarctica. It's like, didn't really have to think too much about it, except remembering to put a mail hold while we were gone. And we did that for a number of years. And then in 2008, I took my current job at NSF. And it got to a point in life where it felt like we had better get on having kids or not having kids. And the timing wasn't ideal. I was still spending probably close to 2 months a year working in Antarctica. My husband was we were living separately. He was away at graduate school, but we just kind of dove into things without really much of a plan. So as we heard in some of the talks earlier today, I am not the first woman to kind of go into being in Antarctica without a plan. This is Jenny Darlington, who accompanied the Ronnie expedition that we heard so much about earlier today. And she went and spent a year in Antarctica. And when she got back, and that was kind of unexpected. They thought they were going to South America and then continued onward to Antarctica. And when she got back from this expedition, she got some of the questions that I think we all get when we come back from Antarctica. She says, people used to ask me, was it cold? So yes, it was cold. Were there polar bears? No, there were not polar bears. What if you had gotten pregnant? I did. So she was, as far as we know, the first woman to have gotten pregnant in Antarctica. She was there until March 1948, and their daughter was born that July. So we still have challenges with pregnancies in Antarctica. To get to Antarctica through our program, you have to pass a pretty rigorous physical. And if you find out that you are pregnant, you lose your physical qualification to be in Antarctica. And so you either do not get to go, or you are then removed from Antarctica. So it makes total sense from a safety perspective, because our level of medical care is like urgent care level. Like, we can treat you if you get hurt, or we most likely will send you back to New Zealand. So we just don't have a lot of advanced medical care, and there's certainly nothing like obstetric care. And we certainly don't want people who are there isolated for potentially an entire winter to be pregnant, because it's supposed to be like a normal mammal thing to carry a child, but there's a lot of things that could go wrong. And it's just an increasingly uncommon situation in the rest of the working world. I mean, I think 30 years ago, before I think it's the Pregnancy Discrimination Act, you could lose your job for being a woman who is pregnant, but now you can't. But in a situation like we find ourselves in, you potentially can't do your job if you are pregnant. But nonetheless, my husband and I decided we were going to try to have a baby. And I felt like my timing with this was pretty lucky. I was pregnant over the summer at home, and my son was born in October. And I took that season off from deploying. My husband then finished graduate school about a year later. He finished up in December of the following year. And he came home, and then 2 weeks later, I went back to Antarctica when my son was about 14 months old. So the first time back, I think for those of you who have been to Antarctica, even if you take breaks, my experience at least is when you come back, things feel pretty much the same. I'm looking at some of these pictures here from the 60s and 70s, and it's like, oh, that still looks pretty much like McMurdo does today. But things were sort of subtly different for me. So one of the first times I really noticed this was when I was, I think probably my first weekend back, and I was at brunch waiting in the egg line in McMurdo, and I showed up in December, and the cooks on the egg line by December, they kind of know everybody on station because they've all been there for 2 months, or at least like the people on station who eat eggs and wait in line every day or every Sunday for eggs. So one of the cooks asked if I was new. And I said, well, yeah, I just got to station this past week. And he said, oh, I don't recognize you. Is this your first time to McMurdo? Because I wasn't there the year before. And I said, oh, I wasn't here last year. I was on maternity leave. And it really kind of only dawned on me a little later that that's kind of a bizarre thing to say. Like, you don't really go on maternity leave from working in Antarctica. It's like so normal for you take a month or 2 months or 3 months off from your regular job, but not really from McMurdo. But it was little things like that. And now I started to seeing motherhood in the Antarctic in a way that it's hard to know if it just wasn't there before or if it was only that my eyes were just opened to it now. Another experience was that I met on that same trip another mom whose baby was a little bit younger than my son, and she was going to be in McMurdo just for a couple of weeks, and she planned to pump breast milk while she was in McMurdo. And I had already weaned, and the idea of going to Antarctica and pumping, like, it didn't even cross my mind. But now it's a situation that I won't say that it's common, but it's certainly not unheard of. And I could probably think of, at least 4 or 5 women who have tried to figure this out. And some women, they will store and freeze breast milk to then try to ship home. And that, I mean, for, again, those of you who have been there, you know what it's like trying to get things into the cargo system. And like, we're like, what are, it's really hard in this very tight environment to figure out places for women to pump. People don't have their own rooms. People don't have offices. You're maybe living in the field. I've been part of discussions about whether breast milk is considered a food or a body fluid, and can we keep it in the same freezer with the rest of our food? And so it's like these kind of strange considerations that that we as a program are trying to accommodate, but it still feels a little bit like every woman for herself. So as my kids have gotten a little bit older and gone into school, I've been confronted with other strange things that come up when you're far away from home for an extended time. So one thing that came up in my son's class was that he needed a photo of the whole family lined up by height. I think it was probably for some sort of a math lesson. And I was in Antarctica, so what were we going to do about this? So my husband said, okay, go and get a picture of yourself with nothing behind you. So here I am, I'm like standing out on the ice, and then he's pretty proficient with Photoshop, and so he just added the rest of the family. we sent that on into school. And it gets especially complicated for families where both parents work in Antarctica. Megan Walker, who is the field manager at the Antarctic support contractor, she and her husband, Dan, who's an IT project manager, they have a handoff system. So I think Megan unexpectedly had to go to McMurdo early this year. So she's in McMurdo now. And then I think she's gonna leave and her husband's gonna bring the kids to New Zealand, and then she's gonna take them and go home, and he's gonna go to McMurdo. And then I think they might have to do this again a second time. And so it kind of reminds me, that logic problem where you're on a river and you've got the the goat and the fox and the cabbage, and you're trying to get across, but it's like international travel by yourself with 2 little kids is like more complicated than this weird logic problem. So beyond just sort of these personal experiences that people have, there's definitely sort of an organizational and there's an organizational and programmatic element to all of this. So on the logistics side, a lot of my deployments are relatively short. I'll be gone for maybe 6 weeks, which is, it's a long time to be away from home. But compared to some of my colleagues on the logistics side, people are deployed for 6 months or for a year. And in my experience, it's not uncommon to meet fathers who are gone for that amount of time. They'll deploy for an entire support season, but not really so common for the mothers to be doing this. And it affects us, like who's in our pipeline, who's filling these positions. Our administrative officer in polar programs at NSF, Pawnee Maiden, she deployed and worked in the chalet for 10 seasons. And then she had a baby and she stopped deploying at all because she just couldn't be away from home for that amount of time anymore, or didn't want to be. And that changed the whole way that we even support some of the things that we do for positions. That was a job that was filled by someone who worked for NSF, and we couldn't find anybody else within NSF to fill that position. And so we turned it over to be a seasonal contract position through the contractor. And that's fine because our contractor is really good at hiring a lot of people to fill jobs for a 5 or 6 month stint. But then you lose continuity and you're in a position where you're potentially, you get a couple of years out of someone in a position and then they move on. And so instead of having someone who 10 years in a row can come in and do a job and knows exactly what it's supposed to be, you're kind of relearning the ropes, and it can just be hard kind of across the program. And I have to wonder, like, who are we losing out of the program because the jobs we have can't accommodate wanting to also be a mother. And I feel like sometimes I should say be a parent, but again, it feels like it more impacts the mothers than it does the fathers. And I think the other thing for us as a community is that there are certainly other communities where mothers are gone for extended periods, especially in the military. And what I've seen from the women, from family members and friends in the military, they often have a sort of a built-in support network. People who live on bases have other families who are going through similar things. And the Antarctic community is really geographically dispersed. Like, we all often know each other, but we're not there to provide any kind of day-to-day assistance to each other. And we also in Antarctica experience things like our internet is still terrible. We can't use Skype, we can't use FaceTime. It can be a struggle sometimes, depending where you are, to even make phone calls. And if you do make a phone call, it's hard to have a phone call with a really small child, especially these days, who looks at the phone and asks like where your picture is, because they're just used to doing some kind of interactive thing. Military bases, I've had video teleconferences with people on military bases in the middle of Afghanistan, and their internet, it's like they're down the street. And we just don't have any of that in Antarctica, which makes it really just that much more difficult to be away. So I am going to end, I'm going to play about a 3-minute clip of a StoryCorps story. People who listen to NPR are probably familiar with StoryCorps. It's a program where they record just regular people telling their own stories, and the idea is to build community, and they archive all of these at the Library of Congress. So this is a clip from Zoe Corville and Laura Koenig, who are 2 polar glaciologists and mothers. And Laura probably doesn't know this, but one of the first ways that I kind of got pulled into the circle of polar motherhood was that Laura's, I think, first child was born a few years before mine. And she had put together this great spreadsheet of like all the things you need when you have a new baby, like how many onesies and how many bottles and the best kind of baby wipes. And it was all on this very tidy spreadsheet because, like we're scientists and that's what we do. And she had passed that spreadsheet to Renee Crain, who is my counterpart in the Arctic logistics program, same last name, no relation. And so then when I was having a baby, Renee passed this spreadsheet to me. So like we're all these like polar folks and we're spread out and we're working at different ends of the earth, but sort of all converging through this common relationship that we have. So in this clip, Zoe and Laura talk about the challenges of doing this kind of work while being mothers, and also sort of in the end, what makes it all worth it.
Dr. Zoe Corville and Dr. Laura Koenig first met over a decade ago in the middle of the Greenland ice sheet. Their work as scientists takes them to some of the most remote parts of the world, where they spend weeks at a time studying the impact of climate change. At StoryCorps, they talked about how their friendship helps them navigate work-life balance thousands of miles from home.
I remember the first time my son said, "Mom, are you taking your big bag or your little bag?" And that was his question of, how long are you going to be gone for?
Yeah.
I had gotten my first grant. I went to the field. I cried the whole plane ride when I left, and I missed his first Christmas. But when I got back, he snuggled right in.
I had my son in 2011, so you were the pioneer, and I had to ask you a lot of questions. The biggest question I had was if your son remembered you when you came back after being gone.
When you asked me that, I remember thinking I didn't necessarily have good advice. We're scientists, we want data, and we don't have that.
When I did get back home, my son didn't recognize me. He sort of recoiled when I went to go have my imagined moment of us running into each other's arms. I wondered if I had done the right thing.
Yeah.
I had one instance that I still sort of struggle with, someone I respect as a scientist immensely. Unsolicited, he said to me, I was in the field a lot, and I was always grateful that my wife stayed home with the kids because kids need their mothers. He very pointedly wanted to let me know that he felt that that was very important. But kids also need their fathers, and you don't hear that a lot.
Yeah. I think I'm a better scientist because I'm a mother, because I work harder in the field. If I'm away from my children, there's an extra weight that I have to do even better.
Just recently, I wanted to do an extra trip to the South Pole, and the way I had phrased it to my husband was, honey, they might need someone to go to the South Pole to drill some ice cores. And my son actually piped up and he said, "Mommy, you can do that." And so there was a moment where I felt like things would be okay, that my son actually understands what I do is important and is kind of proud of me.